The laughter hit her before the words did, high and cruel, rolling through the marble hall like breaking glass, and Rosalie Brennan stood very still in the center of it, her hands folded carefully over the soft curve of her stomach, her face a mask she had practiced for 24 years. "No prince will want her," someone said, loud enough to be heard over the music, and the laughter came again, sharper this time. The spring courtship ball was held every year in the glass pavilion, a soaring structure of iron and crystal that sat at the border between the human city and the vampire territories, neutral ground where the two worlds could meet under treaty and moonlight. Tonight it glittered with 1,000 candles, and the chandeliers threw patterns across the marble floor where human nobles and vampire aristocracy mingled in an elaborate dance of politics and marriage brokering. Rosalie had been brought here by her aunt, a minor baroness with social ambitions and very little sense, who had paid an exorbitant fee for the privilege of presenting her niece to the season's most eligible bachelors. Rosalie had known it was a mistake from the moment she stepped through the doors in her pale blue gown, custom-made because nothing in the shops would fit her properly, the fabric carefully chosen to drape rather than cling. She had known it when the other girls, sleek and delicate in their silks, had looked at her with pity or contempt. She had known it when the music started and no one asked her to dance, but knowing and enduring were different things, and the laughter made her chest tight. "Perhaps they'll find her a merchant," another voice suggested, dripping with false sympathy. "Someone who values practicality." Rosalie kept her eyes on the far wall, where the great doors stood open to the night garden. If she could just make it through the next hour without crying, she could go home and forget this ever happened. Her aunt would be disappointed, but her aunt was always disappointed. "Beautiful." The word cut through the noise like a blade, and the hall went silent. Rosalie's gaze snapped to the source, her heart hammering. At the top of the stairs, framed by the archway that led to the private galleries, stood a man, no, a vampire who could only be the king. She had never seen him before, but she knew him instantly. Everyone did. Ithel Lucien, the vampire king, ruler of the night territories and holder of the oldest bloodline in the eastern continent. He was tall and pale, his skin the color of moonlight, his hair white as snow and falling loose past his shoulders. He wore black, simple and unadorned, and he moved down the stairs with a grace that made the air feel heavy. He was looking directly at her. "Beautiful," he said again, quieter this time, as though he were stating a fact for the record. The silence stretched. Rosalie could feel every eye in the room on her, could feel the weight of 100 gazes pressing against her skin. Her face burned. Ithel reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward her, his footsteps soundless on the marble. The crowd parted for him like water. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver of his eyes, he inclined his head in a gesture that was not quite a bow but carried the same respect. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. His voice was low and steady, with an accent she couldn't place. "I could not let such a statement go unchallenged." Rosalie stared at him. Her mind had gone blank, white noise filling the space where thoughts should be. She started, and her voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I don't understand. They said no prince would want you." His gaze did not waver. "I am not a prince, I am a king, and I find you beautiful." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the room. Rosalie heard gasps, whispers, the rustle of silk as people turned to each other in shock. "Why?" she asked, because it was the only thing she could think to say. Ithel's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. "Because you are. Do I need another reason?" Before she could answer, he extended his hand. "Will you dance with me?" Rosalie looked at his hand, pale and long-fingered, and then at his face. He was serious. He was actually serious. "I'm not," she hesitated. "I'm not a very good dancer." "Neither am I," he said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. "We will manage." She took his hand. The music started again, a slow waltz, and Ithel led her onto the floor with the same quiet confidence he had shown descending the stairs. His hand settled at her waist, firm and warm through the fabric of her gown, and he guided her into the first turn with a gentleness that surprised her. "You're trembling," he said softly. "Everyone is watching." "Let them." She risked a glance at his face. He was watching her, not the crowd, his silver eyes steady and unreadable. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told you, I find you beautiful, but you don't know me. I know enough." He turned her again, and she stumbled slightly. His hand tightened, steadying her. "I know that you stood in the center of their cruelty and did not flinch. I know that you did not run, did not weep, did not give them the satisfaction. That takes strength." Rosalie's throat tightened. "That's not beauty, isn't it?" He tilted his head, studying her. "I have lived a long time, Rosalie Brennan. I have seen beauty in many forms. Yours is the kind that matters." She blinked. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know the names of those who enter my territory," he said, "even the ones who do not expect to be noticed." The dance ended, and he released her, stepping back with the same careful formality he had shown when he approached. Around them the crowd was still silent, still watching. Ithel looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "I would like to see you again, if you are willing." Rosalie's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Yes, I think I would like that." He inclined his head again. A small, graceful movement, and then he turned and walked back toward the stairs, leaving her standing alone in the center of the floor. The whispers started the moment he was gone, a rising tide of shock and speculation, but Rosalie barely heard them. She was still trying to process what had just happened, still trying to believe that it had been real. Her aunt appeared at her elbow, eyes wide and glittering. "Rosalie, do you have any idea?" "Not now," Rosalie said, and walked toward the garden doors before anyone else could speak to her. The night air was cool and smelled of jasmine. She sank onto a stone bench beneath a willow tree and pressed her hands to her face, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Beautiful, he had called her. Beautiful. She did not know what to do with that. The scandal broke the next morning. Rosalie woke to find her aunt pacing the length of the drawing room, a stack of newspapers clutched in her hand, her face pale with a mixture of excitement and terror. "You're ruined," her aunt said, thrusting the papers at her. "Or you're made. I can't tell which." The headline read, "Vampire King Declares Mystery Woman Beautiful at Spring Ball." Beneath it was a sketch of Rosalie, unflattering and exaggerated, her body rendered in thick, heavy lines. The article was worse. It speculated about her family, her background, her intentions. It suggested she had somehow entrapped the king, that she was a social climber or a spy or worse. It quoted anonymous sources, other debutantes, their mothers, their fathers, who expressed shock and outrage that the king would lower himself to notice someone so plainly unsuitable. Rosalie set the paper down carefully and looked at her aunt. "What do I do?" Her aunt shook her head. "I don't know. This has never happened before." A knock at the door interrupted them. A servant appeared, holding a silver tray with a single envelope on it, sealed with black wax and stamped with the royal crest. Rosalie's hands shook as she opened it. The note inside was written in a strong, slanting hand. "Miss Brennan, I regret that my words have caused you difficulty. That was not my intention. If you are willing, I would like to speak with you privately. A carriage will be sent for you this evening at 8. Ithel Lucien." Her aunt read over her shoulder and made a strangled sound. "You can't go alone. It's not proper." "I don't think propriety matters any more," Rosalie said quietly. The carriage was black and unmarked, drawn by 2 midnight horses, and it arrived exactly at 8. Rosalie wore a simple dress, dark green and high-necked, and wrapped herself in a cloak before stepping outside. The driver, a vampire with pale eyes and a blank expression, opened the door for her without a word. The ride took her out of the human quarter and into the vampire territories, where the streets grew narrower and darker, lit only by gaslight and the occasional flicker of torches. They passed through an iron gate and up a long tree-lined drive, and then the carriage stopped in front of a mansion that looked like it had been carved from shadow and stone. Ithel was waiting for her at the entrance. He wore black again, his white hair tied back, and he looked just as he had the night before, calm, composed, impossibly beautiful. "Thank you for coming," he said, and gestured for her to follow him inside. The mansion was grand but not ostentatious, all dark wood and heavy curtains, with high ceilings and rooms that seemed to stretch into darkness. He led her to a private sitting room, where a fire burned in the hearth and 2 chairs had been arranged facing each other. "Please sit," he said, and waited until she had before taking the other chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rosalie folded her hands in her lap and tried to steady her breathing. "I owe you an apology," Ithel said finally. I did not consider the consequences of my words. I spoke the truth, but the truth is not always kind. Rosalie looked at him. You made me a target. Yes. He did not flinch from it. I did. The other families are furious. They think I've stolen something that was meant for their daughters. They think I'm a social climber or a charlatan or... She stopped, her voice breaking slightly. They think I've tricked you somehow. I know. His expression was grave. I have heard the rumors. Can you undo it? She asked. Can you take it back? Ithel was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I could. I could issue a public statement. Say that I was mistaken, or that my words were misinterpreted. The rumors would die, and you would be left alone. But it would be a lie. He leaned forward, his silver eyes intent. And I do not lie, Rosalie. Not about things that matter. Her breath caught. What are you saying? I am saying that I meant what I said. I find you beautiful. I find you interesting. And I would like to know you better if you will allow it. Why? She asked, and the word came out raw. Why me? Ithel regarded her for a long moment, and then he said, because when I looked at you, I saw someone real. Not a performance, not a mask, just you. And I have not seen that in a very long time. Rosalie's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of him. I don't know if I can do this, she said. I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand in the middle of their hatred and pretend it doesn't hurt. You don't have to pretend, Ithel said quietly. You only have to decide whether it is worth it, whether I am worth it. She looked at him, this strange, ancient king who had upended her life with a single word, and she thought about the way he had danced with her, the way he had steadied her when she stumbled, the way he had looked at her like she was something precious. I don't know you, she said. Then let me give you the chance. She took a breath, then another. All right, she said. But I need your honesty. If this becomes too dangerous, if the other families come for me, they will not touch you, Ithel said, and his voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. I will not allow it. You can't protect me from everything. No, he agreed. But I can try. Rosalie met his gaze and saw the sincerity there, the quiet, unshakable resolve. All right, she said again. Then let's see where this goes. The attacks started 3 days later. They were subtle at first whispers in the market, cut direct from women she had considered acquaintances, invitations rescinded at the last moment. Then came the letters, unsigned and vicious, calling her names she would not repeat aloud. Then came the scandal sheets, printing increasingly wild stories about her past, her family, her intentions. And then came Lady Vivian Ashford. Vivian was the daughter of a powerful human duke, a beauty by anyone's standards, with golden hair and a figure that fit every current fashion. She had been widely considered the favorite to catch the king's attention this season, and Rosalie's sudden appearance had derailed those plans entirely. Vivian did not take it well. The first direct confrontation happened at a garden party hosted by one of the neutral houses, a carefully orchestrated event meant to ease tensions between the human and vampire communities. Rosalie had not wanted to attend, but Ithel had asked her to accompany him, and she had agreed, partly because she wanted to see him and partly because she refused to hide. She wore a gown of deep rose, another custom piece, and she walked into the garden with her head high, Ithel at her side. The party fell silent when they entered. Ithel seemed not to notice. He guided her to a table beneath a flowering tree, pulled out her chair and sat beside her with the same quiet ease he showed everywhere. "They're staring," Rosalie murmured. "They always stare," Ithel said. "It is what they do. Does it ever bother you?" "No." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "But I have had centuries to grow accustomed to it. You have had only days." Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Rosalie looked up to find Vivian Ashford standing there, a glass of wine in one hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Your Majesty," Vivian said, curtsying deeply. "Miss Brennan, how lovely to see you both." Ithel inclined his head. "Lady Ashford." Vivian's gaze slid to Rosalie, assessing and cold. "I must say, Miss Brennan, you've caused quite a stir. Everyone is talking about you." "I'm sure they are," Rosalie said evenly. "It's just so unusual," Vivian continued, her tone light and poisonous. "For the king to take an interest in someone so unexpected. One can't help but wonder what you did to catch his attention." "I stood still and did not run," Rosalie said. "Apparently that was enough." Vivian's smile tightened. How charming, though I do hope you're not planning to make a habit of these public appearances. Some people find it difficult to watch. Ithel set down his glass with a soft clink. Lady Ashford, he said, and his voice was still quiet, still calm, but there was steel beneath it now. I believe you have overstayed your welcome at this table. Vivian's eyes widened. Your Majesty, You may go. It was not a request. Vivian's face flushed, and for a moment Rosalie thought she might argue. Then she curtsied again, jerkily, and turned on her heel, her skirt swirling as she walked away. Rosalie let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Ithel said, I did. She'll only hate me more now. She already hates you. At least now she knows there are consequences. Rosalie looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw and the cold glitter in his eyes, and she felt something shift in her chest. He had defended her without hesitation, without cruelty, but with absolute finality. Thank you, she said softly. Ithel's expression eased. You do not need to thank me for treating you with the respect you deserve. But Rosalie did thank him, because no one else ever had. The next attack was worse. It came in the form of a public accusation, printed in the largest newspaper in the city, claiming that Rosalie had used dark magic to ensnare the king, that she was a witch or a spy or both, and that she posed a danger to the fragile peace between humans and vampires. The accusation was absurd, but it did not matter. Absurd accusations, if repeated often enough, became truth in the minds of those who wanted to believe them. Rosalie read the article in her aunt's drawing room, her hands shaking with fury and fear. This is madness, her aunt said, pacing again. They can't truly believe. They don't have to believe it, Rosalie said. They just have to make enough people doubt. A knock at the door made them both jump. The servant reappeared, looking pale. Miss Brennan, there's a delegation here to see you. Rosalie's stomach dropped. A delegation? From the Duke of Ashford's house. They say they have questions. Rosalie exchanged a glance with her aunt, who looked as though she might faint. Then she stood, smoothing her skirts, and said, Show them in. The delegation consisted of 3 men, the Duke of Ashford himself, a stern man with iron-grey hair, a lawyer with cold eyes and a ledger, and a priest robed in white and carrying a leather-bound book. They did not sit. They stood in the center of the drawing-room and looked at Rosalie as though she were something they had found on the bottom of their shoes. Miss Brennan, the Duke said, we have come to discuss certain allegations that have been made against you. Rosalie lifted her chin. I'm aware of the allegations. They are lies. Are they? The lawyer opened his ledger. We have testimony from 3 separate sources claiming to have seen you in the company of known practitioners of dark magic. We have records of unusual purchases made under your name, herbs, candles, items associated with spellcraft. That's ridiculous, Rosalie said. I have never. We also have reason to believe, the priest interrupted, his voice cold and flat, that you have used supernatural means to influence the king's judgment. Such actions are forbidden under both human and vampire law. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. That's not true. I haven't done anything. Then you will not object to an examination, the Duke said. A simple test to prove your innocence. What kind of test? The priest stepped forward, opening his book. A binding ritual. If you are innocent, it will show no sign of magical interference. If you are guilty, the truth will be revealed. Rosalie's heart hammered. She had heard of binding rituals painful, invasive, and sometimes fatal if performed incorrectly, and she had no guarantee that these men would perform it correctly, or that they would accept the results even if she passed. I refuse, she said. The Duke's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice but to assume guilt. You can assume whatever you like, Rosalie said, her voice shaking. But I will not submit to torture on the word of your daughter and her friends. The Duke took a step toward her, and Rosalie's aunt made a frightened sound. And then the door opened, and Ithel Lucien walked into the room. He moved like a shadow, silent and swift, and he placed himself between Rosalie and the delegation with a finality that made the air crackle. Gentlemen, he said, and his voice was soft and terrible. You are in my territory, in the home of a woman under my protection, making accusations without evidence and demanding submission to a ritual that has no legal standing. I suggest you leave before I take offense. The Duke paled. Your Majesty, we only seek... "You seek to intimidate and harm," Ithel said, "and you have failed. Go." The priest opened his mouth as if to argue, but the lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. The Duke followed, his face tight with rage. When they were gone, Ithel turned to Rosalie. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. Ithel reached out, his hand hovering just beside her face, not quite touching. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have anticipated this." Rosalie closed her eyes, leaning into the almost touch. "This is getting worse." "Yes. What do I do?" Ithel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You have 3 choices. You can withdraw, leave the city, go somewhere they cannot reach you. You can fight, stand your ground, and let me protect you, though that may mean violence. Or you can win." Rosalie opened her eyes. "Win? Turn them," Ithel said. "Not all of them. You will never turn all of them, but enough. Win allies one at a time until the tide shifts." "How?" "By being who you are," he said simply. "By showing them that you are not a threat, not a charlatan, not a monster, just a woman who deserves to exist without their permission." Rosalie looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his face, and she felt something harden in her chest. "All right," she said. "Then I'll win." Winning, it turned out, was harder than fighting. Rosalie started small. She attended every public event she was invited to, and several she was not. She spoke to people who would listen, and she ignored those who would not. She was polite, unfailingly polite, even to those who cut her or whispered behind her back, and slowly, grudgingly, some of them began to listen. The first was Lady Marguerite Colton, an older woman who had lost her husband to illness and her son to war, and who had no patience for the petty cruelties of the younger set. She approached Rosalie at a charity auction, looked her up and down, and said, "You're the girl the king called beautiful." "Yes, my lady," Rosalie said. Lady Marguerite nodded. "Good. These fools need a reminder that beauty is not a size or a shape. It's a quality of the soul. You have it. They do not." She walked away before Rosalie could respond, but the message was clear, and others noticed. The second was Lord Everett Tate, a vampire elder who had served on the King's Council for 200 years and who valued honesty above all else. He cornered Rosalie at a state dinner and asked her bluntly whether she had used magic to influence the king. "No, my lord," Rosalie said, meeting his gaze. "I have not." "Good," Lord Everett said, "because if you had, I would have you removed from the city. But I have known Ithel for a very long time, and he is not a fool. If he says you are worth his attention, I am inclined to believe him." He too walked away, but the endorsement mattered. The council began to shift. The third was a surprise. Vivian Ashford's younger sister, a girl named Clara, who had watched the entire scandal with wide, worried eyes. She found Rosalie in the library of the Glass Pavilion one afternoon and said quietly, "I'm sorry for what my sister has done. It's not right." Rosalie looked at her, this pale, nervous girl who was risking her family's wrath to speak to her, and she said, "Thank you." Clara nodded and fled, but the gesture remained. One by one, the tide began to turn. Not everyone there were still those who hated her, who would always hate her, but enough. Enough that the whispers began to change. Enough that the scandal sheets found new targets. Enough that when Rosalie walked into a room, the silence was no longer always hostile. And through it all, Ithel was there. He did not interfere, did not fight her battles for her, but he was present, a steady, quiet presence at her side, his hand at her back or his voice in her ear, reminding her that she was not alone. They spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his life, the centuries he had lived, the wars he had fought, the peace he had brokered. She told him about her childhood, her family, her dreams that had seemed so small before she met him. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning strike. It was a gradual unfolding, a series of small moments that added up to something vast and undeniable. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, his expression soft and unguarded. It was the way she reached for his hand without thinking, and the way he always took it. It was the way they fit together as though they had been made for this, for each other. One night, as they sat together in his library, the fire casting long shadows across the floor, Ithel said, "I love you." The words were quiet, almost hesitant, as though he were offering her something fragile. Rosalie looked at him, at this ancient king who had chosen her out of a room full of candidates, who had defended her and supported her, and never once asked her to be anything other than herself, and she said, "I love you too." Ithel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that looked like relief. He reached for her, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and he kissed her. It was a slow, sweet kiss, full of promise and certainty, and when they pulled apart, Rosalie was smiling. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ithel said, "we finish this." The season's closing ball was held on the summer solstice, a grand affair that marked the end of the courtship period and the beginning of formal betrothals. It was tradition for the most prominent matches to be announced at the ball, and this year the entire city was holding its breath to see what the king would do. Rosalie arrived on Ithel's arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue that had been made especially for the occasion. It was beautiful and elegant and fit her perfectly, and when she walked into the glass pavilion, the room fell silent. But this time, the silence was different. Ithel led her to the center of the floor, and the crowd parted for them, not out of fear or shock, but out of respect. Rosalie saw Lady Marguerite nod approvingly. She saw Lord Everett raise his glass in a silent toast. She saw Clara Ashford watching with something like hope in her eyes. And she saw Vivian Ashford, standing near the back of the room, her face pale and tight with rage and defeat. Ithel turned to face the crowd, and the room went quiet. "I have called you here tonight," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, "to make an announcement. This season, I have met someone who has challenged me, humbled me, and shown me what it means to see clearly. She is brave, kind, and beautiful in every way that matters, and I would like to ask her, in front of all of you, to be my queen." He turned to Rosalie, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. "Rosalie Brennan," he said, "will you marry me?" Rosalie's eyes burned, and her throat was tight, and she could not speak for a long moment. Then she nodded, and the word came out as barely a whisper. "Yes." The room erupted in applause, not universal, not unanimous, but loud and genuine and real. Ithel took her hand and kissed it, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the crowd surged forward to offer their congratulations. Rosalie let herself be held, let herself feel the warmth of his body and the strength of his arms, and she thought about how far she had come from that night when the court had laughed at her. She had not changed. She was still the same woman, still the same body, still the same heart, but she had won. The wedding took place a month later in the chapel at the heart of the vampire territories, a soaring space of stone and stained glass that had stood for 1,000 years. Rosalie wore white, simple and unadorned, and Ithel wore black, and when the priest asked if they would take each other, they both said yes without hesitation. The ceremony was attended by both humans and vampires, the two worlds coming together in a way they had not in generations. There were still those who disapproved, still those who whispered and sneered, but they were drowned out by the music and the cheers and the joy. When Ithel kissed her, sealing the vows, Rosalie felt as though her heart might burst. They held a reception in the gardens of the glass pavilion, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Ithel led her onto the floor for the first dance. "How does it feel," he asked, his voice low and warm, "to be a queen?" Rosalie looked up at him, at the man the vampire who had seen her when no one else had, who had called her beautiful when the world called her a joke, who had loved her, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. "It feels right," she said. "It feels like coming home." Ithel's hand tightened on hers, and he pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "You are my home," he said. "You are my heart, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." Rosalie closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her, letting herself believe them. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," Ithel said. "Always." They danced until the moon was high, until the guests had drifted away and they were alone beneath the stars. And when they finally left the pavilion and returned to the mansion, hand in hand, Rosalie felt as though she were walking into the future, a future she had built herself, one step at a time, one choice at a time. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still those who resented her, still factions that sought to undermine her position, still moments when she felt the weight of the crown pressing down on her shoulders. But Ithel was always there, steady and certain, his love a constant in the shifting tides of court politics. And Rosalie was no longer the girl who had stood silent in the center of a laughing room. She was a queen, confident and capable, beloved by many and respected by more. She learned to navigate the intricate dance of vampire society, to balance the needs of the human territories with the demands of the night court. She became known for her fairness, her compassion, her refusal to be anything other than herself. And when the time came, when the whispers began about heirs and succession, Rosalie and Ithel made the decision together. They would not have children, not in the traditional sense. Ithel was a vampire, and Rosalie was human, and the biology simply did not allow for it. But that did not mean they could not build a family. They adopted first a girl named Genevieve, a human orphan, who had been left on the steps of a church, and then a second girl named Petra, a vampire child whose parents had been killed in a border skirmish. Both girls were loved fiercely and raised with the understanding that family was not about blood, but about choice. Genevieve grew into a brilliant diplomat, negotiating treaties between humans and vampires with a skill that rivaled her mother's. Petra became a warrior, fierce and loyal, defending the kingdom with a passion that made her father proud. And Rosalie watched them grow, watched them thrive, and felt a contentment she had never thought possible. On the night of her 50th birthday, Rosalie stood on the balcony of the mansion, looking out over the city. The lights of the human quarter glittered in the distance, and the vampire territories lay dark and quiet beneath the stars. Ithel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life?" Rosalie leaned back into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "Never," she said. "Not once?" "Even with all the difficulties? The enemies, the politics, the pain?" "Even then." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You called me beautiful when no one else would. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. How could I regret that?" Ithel's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing gently over her cheeks. "You gave me a life, too," he said. "You reminded me what it means to be human, to feel, to love. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Rosalie, and I will love you until the stars go out." Rosalie smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. "And I will love you just as long." They kissed slow and sweet, and the world fell away, leaving only the two of them beneath the endless sky. And in that moment, Rosalie knew that she had won more than just the approval of a court or the respect of a kingdom. She had won a love that would last forever. She had won a life worth living. She had won herself, and that, she thought as Ithel held her close, was the most beautiful thing of all.